Have you ever felt that with each passing year, the world expects you to slowly fade into the background? That somehow, after a certain age, your choices, your style, your opinions should become quieter, safer, less visible? What if I told you that the most vibrant chapter of your life could begin right now, regardless of what society or even your own family thinks you should be doing at your age? The truth is, many of us face a quiet battle as we age, a battle to remain fully ourselves in a world that often has very narrow ideas about what aging should look like. It's a struggle that rarely makes headlines but deeply affects how we experience our later years. Today, we're going to explore how to maintain your authentic self and independence, even when well-meaning family members or friends try to reshape your life to fit their idea of what's appropriate for your age. By the end of this video, you'll discover 8 essential aspects of life that you should never surrender, no matter what anyone says. More importantly, you'll learn practical strategies for protecting these vital parts of yourself while maintaining harmony with those you love. To illustrate this, let me share a story that captures this perfectly. Before we continue, if you're committed to finding the best version of yourself, comment the number 1 below. Now, back to where we were. Along the rugged coastline of Maine, where the Atlantic waves crash against weathered rocks, stands a sunny building called Silver Horizons Community Center. Through its large windows, the ocean stretches endlessly, a reminder that some things, like personal growth, have no limits. Inside, laughter echoes through a sunlit room as 5 seniors gather around a large wooden table, defying the stereotype that aging means quiet withdrawal from life's vibrancy. Frank Wilson, a distinguished former professor with silver hair and a vintage pocket watch that once belonged to his father, gently taps the table. At 78, his eyes still sparkle with the same curiosity that fueled his academic career. "Welcome to another Wisdom Wednesday, my friends," Frank says warmly. "I think we're all here now." Gloria Martinez adjusts her vivid turquoise scarf, a splash of color that perfectly captures her spirit. At 67, the former civil rights attorney carries herself with the same determination that once commanded courtrooms, though her battles are different now after her recent divorce. "I wouldn't miss it," Gloria smiles, her voice strong despite the health challenges she's navigated this year. "These meetings keep me sane." Beside her sits Henry Brooks, at 83 the eldest of the group. His carpenter's hands, marked by decades of craftsmanship, rest on the table. 3 years a widower, Henry's irrepressible spirit shines through in the mischievous grin that appears whenever he's about to share one of his infamous jokes. "Well, I'm here for the cookies," Henry winks. "But I suppose the wisdom is a nice bonus." Irene Choi, 71, laughs softly as she places her tablet on the table. A widow who never touched a computer during her nursing career, she now navigates technology with growing confidence, her digital art gaining followers online that her children couldn't have imagined. "I've been looking forward to today's topic all week," she says. Diane Reynolds, the newest member at 69, nods in agreement. The former school principal now carries marine biology textbooks instead of administrative reports, pursuing the dream she deferred for decades. "Last week," Frank reminds them, looking around the circle, "we discussed how society expects us to quietly fade away after 65. His expression grows more serious. "Today, let's share what we refuse to surrender, no matter what." Frank reveals a leather-bound notebook where he's written a title at the top of the page. "I've been thinking about this a lot," he continues, "about the things each of us has fought to preserve, despite others trying to take them away. I've called it 8 Essentials We Never Surrender." The group leans forward, a collective energy filling the room as Frank prepares to share the first essential element, one that resonates deeply with their shared experiences of fighting too: remain themselves in a world that often misunderstands what aging truly means. Frank opens his notebook and begins. Essential number 1. We never surrender our independence and decision-making authority. His voice grows stronger as he continues. This might be the most fundamental right we must protect. He turns the page of his notebook, revealing notes in his careful handwriting. After Martha passed, Frank shares, his voice softening at the mention of his wife, my children immediately began suggesting I couldn't manage on my own. Within weeks, they'd toured 3 assisted living facilities without even consulting me. Gloria nods knowingly. They always think they're being helpful. Exactly, Frank agrees. Their intentions were good. They worried about me living alone in our 2-story home, but they failed to understand that taking away my right to make my own housing decisions would have stripped away something essential. How did you handle it? Diane asks, leaning forward. Frank's expression brightens. I stood firm, even when my daughter cried about how worried she was, even when my son brought real estate listings to Sunday dinner. He chuckles. Instead of capitulating, I proposed a compromise. I hired an aging-in-place specialist and renovated key areas of my home, added railings, improved lighting, created a first-floor bedroom suite. That couldn't have been cheap, Henry observes. No, but it was my decision to make with my resources, Frank replies. The renovation preserved both my independence and my children's peace of mind. Most importantly, it kept me in the home where I feel most myself, surrounded by 50 years of memories. Frank leans forward, his expression earnest. Making our own decisions isn't just about dignity, though that's essential. Medical research actually shows that seniors who maintain decision-making authority over their lives experience better health outcomes. A study from the Journal of Health and Aging found that older adults who maintained autonomy had 63% lower rates of depression and significantly reduced cognitive decline. It's like the Stoics taught, Diane adds. We cannot control aging itself, but we can control how we respond to it and who makes the decisions about our lives. Frank nods appreciatively. Precisely. Here's what I've learned. Never let someone else's anxiety about your aging dictate your choices. Instead, address their legitimate concerns with thoughtful solutions that preserve your autonomy. But how do you resist when it's your own children applying the pressure? Irene asks quietly. With calm determination, Frank answers, acknowledge their concerns, but don't let emotional appeals override your rational judgment. Prepare for these conversations. Know what's most important to you and where you're willing to compromise. And remember, giving up small things can sometimes help. You protect what's truly essential. He closes his notebook momentarily. Each of us will face this battle in some form. The world is eager to take decision-making power from aging individuals, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with force, but always with the assumption that we've somehow become less capable of knowing what's best for ourselves. Frank looks around. The circle. The fundamental truth is this: no one else, regardless of how much they love you, can decide what makes your life worth living. That knowledge resides solely within you. Gloria straightens in her chair, adjusting her turquoise scarf. That leads perfectly into essential number 2, she says with quiet confidence. We never surrender our personal style and self-expression. The others smile, recognizing how Gloria embodies this principle in her vibrant clothes and bold accessories, a striking contrast to the subdued attire many expect from someone her age. After my divorce 3 years ago, Gloria begins, I found myself with an unexpected freedom. Martin had always preferred I dress appropriately. His word, not mine. She makes air quotes with her fingers. But I soon discovered my family had similar expectations. My daughter gently suggested more age-appropriate clothes when we shopped. My son winced at my red lipstick. What were they afraid of? Henry asks with a mischievous grin. That you'd actually look like yourself? Gloria laughs. I think they feared I'd draw attention. Heaven forbid a woman my age be noticed. There's this unspoken rule that we should fade into the background. After a certain age, become invisible in neutral colors and sensible shoes. She leans back, her eyes bright with conviction. For months after the divorce, I found myself in beige cardigans and navy slacks. Not because I liked them, but because they were suitable. Then one day, I was helping my granddaughter choose a prom dress. She picked this fantastic emerald green gown that made her eyes shine, and when I told her how beautiful she looked, she said, "I wish you'd wear colors like this, Grandma. You'd look amazing." Gloria's voice softens. That innocent comment broke. Something open in me. I realized I'd surrendered a fundamental form of self-expression. The next day, I donated every beige cardigan and navy slack to the community center thrift shop. "I remember that donation," Frank interjects with a laugh. The volunteers were thrilled. Well, the day I walked into my granddaughter's graduation, wearing a red dress with silver accessories, was the day I truly became myself again, Gloria continues. My daughter was mortified. She actually asked if I was having some kind of crisis. Gloria rolls her eyes good-naturedly. The only crisis was that I'd spent too long dressing for other people's comfort. Personal style isn't vanity, she explains passionately. It's identity. It's showing the world who you are without saying a word. When we surrender that, we surrender a piece of our essential self. Diane nods vigorously. Research supports this too. Studies show that forced conformity to others' expectations about appearance actually increases rates of depression in older adults. Exactly, Gloria agrees. I've discovered that reclaiming my personal style has profound effects on how I move through the world. When I dress in ways that express who I truly am, I stand taller, speak more confidently, engage more fully. But not everyone approves, she acknowledges with a wry smile. My former colleagues were startled the first time I showed up to our monthly lunch in bright colors and statement jewelry. One actually asked if I was okay, as if expressing joy through appearance was a symptom of something wrong. Gloria leans forward, her expression earnest. Here's what I've learned. Being yourself, authentically, unapologetically yourself, becomes more important with age, not less. The Stoics taught that living according to our nature brings peace. Well, my nature isn't beige, and I'm finally at peace with that. The group laughs appreciatively as Gloria concludes, so wear the bright colors if they call to you, or the elegant neutrals if that's your authentic style. Just make sure you're dressing for yourself, not to meet someone else's expectation of how aging should look. Henry, who's been listening with a grin, raises his hand. That brings us perfectly to essential number 3, he says, eyes twinkling. We never surrender our sense of humor and playfulness. At 83, Henry's face is mapped with lines that deepen when he smiles, which is often. When my Margaret died, my daughter Bethany moved in temporarily to help me adjust, he begins. She's a good girl with good intentions, but after a few weeks, she started monitoring my behavior like I was one of her teenagers. The day I signed up for the community theater's comedy troupe, you'd have thought I'd joined a motorcycle gang, Henry continues, chuckling. Bethany was mortified. Dad, she said, shouldn't you be focusing on more serious things at your age, as if there's an age limit on laughter? He shakes his head, remembering. When I asked what serious things I should be doing instead, she suggested chair yoga and memoir writing. Both fine activities, but neither exactly set my soul on fire like making an audience laugh. What did you do? Irene asks, clearly invested in the story. I told her that at my age, I've earned the right to act however I please. Henry's laugh fills the room. Then I explained that our comedy troupe actually performs at nursing homes and hospitals, bringing joy to people who desperately need it. That helped her see it wasn't just about me having fun, though that would be reason enough. Henry's expression grows more thoughtful. There's something about aging that makes others uncomfortable with our joy, as if growing older means surrendering to perpetual seriousness. But I found exactly the opposite to be true. Maintaining my sense of humor has carried me through my darkest moments. When Margaret was in hospice, he continues more quietly, we still found moments to laugh together. Those moments weren't disrespectful to the gravity of our situation. They were islands of humanity in an ocean of difficulty. Frank nods supportively. The science backs you up, Henry. Research shows that laughter literally improves immune function, reduces pain, and increases cognitive function, especially in older adults. Please like the video if you're enjoying this story. Continuing. That doesn't surprise me a bit, Henry responds. I'm convinced my weekly comedy rehearsals do more for my health than any pill in my medicine cabinet. But it's more than physical benefits. Playfulness keeps us connected to the world, to others, to ourselves. He gestures broadly with his carpenter's hands. Last month, my grandson taught me to play his video racing game. Bethany walked in while we were laughing and competing, and she looked stunned. Later, she asked if it wasn't a little juvenile for someone my age. I asked her when joy became juvenile. The group murmurs in agreement as Henry continues. The Stoics talked about living virtuously, but they also understood that humans are social creatures meant to experience joy. Seneca wrote extensively about the importance of festivals and celebration in a well-lived life. So how do we protect our right to playfulness? Diane asks. First, we recognize that playfulness is not just legitimate but necessary at every age, Henry answers confidently. Then, we actively seek opportunities for joy and laughter, whether that's through formal activities like my theater group or informal moments like game nights with family. He looks around the circle with intensity. Most importantly, we refuse to accept the narrative that dignity and playfulness are somehow in conflict. True dignity includes the full range of human experience, including joy, laughter, and play. Here's what I know for certain, Henry concludes. On my deathbed, I won't regret the times I laughed too loudly or played too enthusiastically. I'll only regret the moments I surrendered my joy to meet someone else's expectation of how aging should look. The group sits with this thought for a moment before Irene gently clears her throat. I believe that brings us to essential number 4, she says in her soft but clear voice. We never surrender our right to learn new skills, especially technology. Irene, always the most reserved of the group, straightens her shoulders as she speaks. During my 40 years as a nurse, I barely used computers. My hospital introduced electronic records the year before I retired, and I struggled even with that basic system. She smiles ruefully. So when my husband died and my children suggested I not worry about learning to use a smartphone or computer, it seemed reasonable. My son actually said, Mom, at your age, why frustrate yourself with all that? We'll handle anything technological you need. Gloria shakes her head in disapproval, as if technology were only for the young. Exactly, Irene nods. For months, after Jim died, I felt increasingly isolated. My children would share family photos on something called a shared album, forgetting I couldn't access it. They'd send group texts about family gatherings, not realizing I couldn't participate in the conversation. When I asked about learning these systems, they'd say, "It's complicated, Mom. Don't worry about it." Their concern wasn't entirely unfounded, Irene acknowledges. I was intimidated by technology and might have given up without support, but what they didn't understand was that their protection was actually cutting me off from family connection and independent living. Irene holds up her tablet. Everything changed when my 7-year-old granddaughter got this tablet for her birthday. When I expressed interest, she, unlike her parents, never questioned whether I could learn to use it. She simply said, "I'll teach you, Grandma," And she did, with infinite patience. Her eyes shine with emotion. Within weeks, I was not only using basic functions but discovering digital art programs. I'd always enjoyed sketching, but never seriously pursued it. Now I create digital artwork that my granddaughter helps me share online. Show them the follower count, Frank encourages with evident pride. Irene blushes slightly. I have over 800 followers on my art account now. People from around the world, many younger than my children, who never question my right to engage with technology or create digital art at 71. The irony, she continues with quiet conviction, is that my children initially discouraged me because they thought technology would frustrate me. But mastering these skills has been profoundly empowering. I manage my own finances online, order groceries when the weather makes driving difficult, attend virtual museum tours, and participate fully in family communications. Never let anyone convince you that you can't learn new technology at our age, she advises, her voice growing stronger. These skills don't just provide entertainment, they preserve independence and connection to the wider world. The research is fascinating on this topic, Diane adds. Studies show that older adults who engage with new technology experience improved cognitive function, decreased feelings of isolation, and greater overall life satisfaction. Irene nods in agreement. Learning challenging new skills at any age creates neural pathways that help protect against cognitive decline. But beyond the health benefits, mastering technology has restored my sense of competence and relevance in a rapidly changing world. What advice would you give someone whose family discourages their technological exploration? Frank asks. Start small, with devices designed to be intuitive, Irene suggests. Find a patient teacher, often a grandchild, or a community class specifically for seniors. And most importantly, persist through initial frustrations, knowing they're part of any learning process, not evidence that you're too old to learn. She smiles at her friends. The Stoics emphasized that we should focus on what we can control. I couldn't control my initial unfamiliarity with technology, but I could control my willingness to learn and persist through challenges. Irene holds up her tablet again. This device that my children thought would frustrate me has instead become a portal to continued growth and connection. It allows me to share my art, manage my life independently, and remain fully engaged with the world on my own terms. She looks around the circle with quiet determination. Technology changes rapidly, and none of us will master every new development. But we must never surrender our right to learn, adapt, and participate in technological advances that enhance our independence and connection. Frank nods appreciatively as Irene concludes. He glances down at his notebook, where 4 of the 8 essentials have now been discussed. The afternoon sunlight streams through Silver Horizon's large windows, illuminating the group as they prepare to explore the remaining essentials. Each one a vital aspect of maintaining their authentic selves in a world that often misunderstands. And what aging truly means. There's a brief pause as Frank takes a sip of water. The afternoon sun casts a golden glow through the windows, illuminating the determination on each face around the table. Diane, her academic background evident in her thoughtful expression, speaks next. Essential number 5 is something I've become passionate about, she begins. We never surrender our educational journey and intellectual curiosity. Diane straightens her reading glasses. When I retired as principal 3 years ago, I finally had time to pursue the passion I'd deferred. For decades, marine biology. I enrolled in university courses, excited to study alongside people who shared my fascination with ocean ecosystems. Let me guess, Henry interjects with a knowing look. Someone suggested birdwatching or gardening instead? Diane laughs. Almost. Exactly. My friends were baffled. Why bother with formal education at 69, they asked. Wouldn't community lectures be more appropriate? She mimics their concerned tone perfectly. What they meant was, wouldn't something less demanding be more suitable for someone your age? She leans forward, her passion evident. What they failed to understand is that the challenging nature of these courses is precisely what makes them valuable to me. I don't want intellectual entertainment. I want rigorous engagement that stretches my mind. How did your classmates respond? Irene asks. That's the remarkable thing, Diane replies. The younger students never questioned my presence the way my peers did. They simply accepted me as a fellow learner. Some even seek me out as a study partner because they value my perspective and discipline. She smiles, remembering. Last semester, I completed a research project analyzing microplastic levels in local watersheds. My professor suggested I submit it to a regional scientific journal where it was published alongside work from researchers decades younger. That's impressive, Frank acknowledges with admiration. What's impressive is the cognitive benefit. Diane responds, research confirms that continuing to learn challenging new material creates what neurologists call cognitive reserve, essentially a buffer against dementia and cognitive decline. One study found that older adults engaged in complex learning experience less hippocampal atrophy than their peers. But the benefits go beyond brain health, she continues earnestly. Continuing education gives life purpose and structure. It connects us to diverse communities and ideas. Most importantly, it reminds us that growth doesn't end at some arbitrary age. The ancient Stoics emphasized lifelong learning, Frank adds. Seneca was still studying new philosophical concepts in his final years. Exactly, Diane agrees. The Stoics understood that intellectual curiosity is fundamental to human flourishing at every age. When we surrender that curiosity to meet others, expectations of age-appropriate activities, we diminish not just our minds, but our spirits. She looks around the circle intently. Here's what I've learned. Never let anyone convince you that serious study belongs only to the young. Our mature minds bring unique strengths to learning, perspective, pattern recognition, and a lifetime of contextual knowledge. But formal education isn't accessible to everyone, Irene points out gently. Absolutely right, Diane acknowledges. The form doesn't matter. What matters is continuing to challenge your mind with material that genuinely engages you. That might be university courses, community workshops, online learning, independent research, or serious autodidactic study. She gestures expansively. The key is refusing to accept intellectual stagnation as an inevitable companion to aging. We must actively resist the subtle societal message that our minds have somehow reached their capacity, that we should now focus solely on reviewing what we've already learned, rather than exploring new intellectual territory. So what do you say to family members who think you're taking on too much? Gloria asks. I acknowledge their concern, then educate them, Diane answers confidently. I share the research about cognitive benefits. I help them understand that intellectual challenge isn't harmful, it's essential. And I gently remind them that I've earned the right to determine my own educational journey. She straightens, her expression resolute. When we surrender our intellectual curiosity, we surrender a fundamental aspect of our humanity. We have a right, perhaps even a responsibility, to remain active learners for as long as we draw breath. As Diane concludes, Gloria nods in agreement. That connects beautifully to essential number 6, she says. We never surrender our meaningful friendships and social connections outside family. Gloria's expressive hands gesture toward the group. This circle is Exhibit A, she says with evident affection. 2 years ago, when I was recovering from pneumonia, my children thought my weekly book club was an unnecessary stress that I should eliminate. They meant well, she acknowledges, but they failed to understand that these friendships provide emotional sustenance that family, as dear as they are, simply cannot. Frank nods in understanding. Research shows diverse social connections are as important to health as not smoking. Some studies suggest social isolation impacts mortality more significantly than obesity or physical inactivity. That's what I tried to explain to my son, Gloria continues. During my recovery, my book club friends brought not just meals, but intellectual stimulation, diverse perspectives, and connections to the wider community that prevented me from defining myself solely as sick or elderly. Before we continue, what's one unspoken lesson you've learned after turning 55 or 60? We'd love to read it. Back to where we were. She looks around the circle. Family relationships are hierarchical by nature. We're always someone's mother, grandmother, aunt. But friendship is egalitarian. With friends, I'm simply Gloria, not defined by family role or age, but by my ideas, humor, and essential self. How did you help your family understand this? Irene asks. Not easily, Gloria admits with a rueful smile. It took several conversations where I had to be quite firm. I explained that while I appreciated their concern, eliminating my social networks would harm, not help my recovery. Her expression grows more serious. Many well-meaning families inadvertently isolate their aging relatives by gradually taking over social planning, deciding which connections are necessary or beneficial. The result is a shrinking world that revolves entirely around family rhythms and needs. The Stoics recognized the importance of community, Frank observes. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about our social nature and the ways connection to others shapes our character and resilience. Precisely, Gloria agrees. And yet, society often assumes that family should become our entire social world as we age, that friends become somehow less necessary or important. She straightens her vibrant scarf. Here's what I've learned. Friendship remains vital throughout life. In fact, research suggests that strong friendships in our later years actually improve family relationships by ensuring we don't place excessive emotional demands on our children or grandchildren. What specific strategies have helped you protect these connections? Diane asks. First, I maintain independence in my social scheduling, Gloria answers. I don't consult my children about whether I should attend book club or meet a friend for coffee. I simply inform them of my plans when relevant. She continues thoughtfully. Second, I use technology to maintain connections independently, texting friends directly rather than relying on my children as social gatekeepers. Gloria looks around the circle. Most importantly, I've been explicit with my family about the value these diverse relationships add to my life. I've helped them understand that supporting my friendships isn't just kindness, it's healthcare in the most holistic sense. Her voice grows stronger. When we surrender our friendships to meet others' expectations about how our social lives should contract with age, we surrender a fundamental source of joy, identity, and emotional resilience. We have every right to maintain and nurture relationships beyond family throughout our lives. Henry nods in vigorous agreement. That leads perfectly to essential number 7, he says. We never surrender our personal space and living arrangements. His carpenter's hands rest on the table as he begins. After Margaret died, my daughter was convinced my 2-story home was impractical and unsafe. She started leaving real estate listings for ranch-style houses and senior communities on my kitchen counter. The group chuckles softly as Henry continues. When I showed no interest, she escalated to bringing a real estate agent to Sunday dinner, without warning me. The agent actually walked through my home taking notes while I ate my pot roast. That's crossing a line, Frank observes with a frown. Indeed, Henry agrees. I finally had to be quite direct. I said, Bethany, I appreciate your concern, but this is my home, filled with 50 years of memories and projects. I'm not leaving, unless it becomes absolutely necessary, and I'll be the one to determine when that time comes, if ever. He gestures expansively. Instead of moving, I renovated. I converted Margaret's sewing room into a first-floor bedroom for when stairs become challenging. I installed better lighting, grab bars in strategic locations, and a security system that gives Bethany peace of mind. Most importantly, he continues with a mischievous smile, I renovated my woodworking shop in the garage. That's where I spend most days, creating furniture for my grandchildren and toys for the children's hospital. His expression grows more serious. What my daughter didn't understand was that my home isn't just shelter. It's the physical embodiment of my independence, my memories, and my ongoing projects. Giving that up would have taken something essential from me. The research supports you, Diane notes. Studies show that aging in place, remaining in one's own home, correlates with better mental health outcomes and slower functional decline compared to relocating to care facilities. That doesn't surprise me, Henry responds. There's profound psychological security in familiar surroundings. I know every creaking floorboard, every stubborn window. This knowledge creates a confidence that would be shattered if I were transplanted to a new environment. He looks around the circle. I understand the genuine safety concerns that motivate our children's push for different living arrangements. But safety isn't the only consideration. Quality of life matters tremendously. How do you balance those concerns? Irene asks. By being proactive rather than reactive, Henry answers confidently. I address legitimate safety issues before they become emergencies. I accept reasonable modifications and assistance, but I remain the ultimate authority on where and how I live. He taps the table gently for emphasis. Here's what I've learned. Our personal space is more than physical shelter. It's the environment, where we express our identity, maintain our routines, and preserve our sense of self. When we surrender control of our living arrangements, we risk surrendering a fundamental aspect of our autonomy. Henry's voice grows passionate. The Stoics taught that we should focus on what we can control. Well, creating a living environment that supports both our physical needs and our psychological well-being is something within our control if we refuse to surrender that decision-making power. So, what advice would you give someone facing pressure to change their living situation? Frank asks. Acknowledge concerns without automatically accepting proposed solutions, Henry suggests. Explore compromise options that address safety issues while preserving independence. And remember that your home is yours. Your children may someday inherit your possessions, but they haven't yet inherited your decision-making authority. The group nods in agreement as Irene gently clears her throat. That brings us to our final essential, she says in her quiet but firm voice. Essential number 8. We never surrender our voice in family decisions. Irene rarely speaks at length, so the group leans forward attentively as she begins. After my husband died, I experienced a subtle but profound shift in family dynamics. Suddenly, my children started making decisions about family gatherings, holidays, even financial matters, without consulting me. How did that manifest? Gloria asks with concern. In dozens of small ways, Irene answers. They changed our traditional Christmas gathering from my home to my son's without asking if I minded. They discussed selling the family lake cottage between themselves, assuming I'd want to simplify. My daughter-in-law took over bringing dishes to church suppers that had always been my responsibility. She shakes her head slowly. None of these changes was presented as a decision. They were presented as fait accompli, usually justified with, we didn't want to bother you, or we thought this would be easier for you now. How did that make you feel? Frank asks gently. Increasingly invisible, Irene admits, as if my preferences and opinions had become less relevant in family matters. The most painful part was realizing they weren't being unkind. They genuinely believed they were helping by relieving me of decisions they assumed would burden me. Her soft voice grows stronger. But decision-making isn't a burden. It's a fundamental aspect of autonomy and personal dignity. When we lose our voice in family matters, we become passive observers rather than active participants in our own lives. How did you address this? Diane inquires. Not easily, Irene acknowledges. I had to consciously reclaim my place at the table, literally and figuratively. I started by insisting on hosting holiday gatherings again, making it clear this wasn't negotiable. She smiles slightly. Then I began questioning changes more directly. When my son mentioned they'd decided to sell the lake cottage, I simply asked, who decided? The question itself highlighted the problem. They had discussed a major family asset without including me. Was there pushback? Gloria asks. Some, Irene admits. Especially when I made clear that financial decisions about assets Jim and I had built together remained ultimately mine to make. My son actually suggested that managing these matters might be stressful for me now. She straightens in her chair. I reminded him that I'd managed our household finances for 40 years while his father was traveling for work. My cognitive abilities hadn't changed just because my marital status had. The research is clear on this, Frank notes. Maintaining decision-making involvement is strongly correlated with psychological well-being and cognitive health in seniors. Exactly, Irene agrees. When we're excluded from family decisions, particularly those that directly affect our lives, we experience what psychologists call learned helplessness, a condition where we stop believing in our ability to affect our circumstances. She looks around the circle. Here's what I've learned. Reclaiming your voice may require uncomfortable conversations. You may need to explicitly state, I appreciate your concern, but I expect to be consulted on decisions that affect me or our family traditions. What about seniors who worry about seeming demanding or difficult? Henry asks. Frame it as a matter of information rather than control, Irene suggests. I told my children, I need to be part of these conversations so I can understand what's happening in our family. That felt less confrontational while still asserting my right to be included. Her quiet voice carries conviction. The Stoics emphasized that we should accept what we cannot change, but they also taught that we must not passively accept limitations that can be overcome through rational action. Being excluded from family decisions is not an inevitable consequence of aging. It's a dynamic we can and should change. Irene concludes with quiet passion. When we surrender our voice in family decisions, we surrender our place as full, respected members of the family unit. We have every right to remain central rather than peripheral figures in our family systems, no matter our age. Frank looks around the circle with evident pride. And there we have it, our 8 essentials we never surrender. Each represents a fundamental aspect of dignity, identity, and autonomy that we must vigilantly protect. He glances down at his notebook, where he's recorded each essential. 1. We never surrender our independence and decision-making authority. 2. We never surrender our personal style and self-expression. 3. We never surrender our sense of humor and playfulness. 4. We never surrender our right to learn new skills, especially technology. 5. We never surrender our educational journey and intellectual curiosity. 6. We never surrender our meaningful friendships and social connections outside family. 7. We never surrender our personal space and living arrangements. 8. We never surrender our voice in family decisions. Frank closes his notebook thoughtfully. Looking at this list, I'm struck by a common theme. Each of these essentials preserves what the Stoics would call our essential nature as autonomous, socially connected, growth-oriented beings. And each faces similar threats, Gloria observes. Well-meaning people who mistake protection for respect, who confuse simplifying our lives with diminishing them. Exactly, Frank agrees. The challenge isn't usually fighting malice, it's navigating the genuine concern of people who love us but fail to understand what truly matters to our well-being. The group nods in understanding as Frank continues. That's why these conversations matter so profoundly. By articulating what we refuse to surrender, we help others understand how to support rather than diminish us as we age. The afternoon sun has begun its descent, casting longer shadows through the windows of silver horizons as the group prepares to conclude their Wisdom Wednesday gathering. Each face reflects the quiet determination of those who have fought to remain fully themselves despite the world's expectations of how aging should look. As the meeting draws to a close, Frank stands and gestures toward the large windows where the sun is setting over the Atlantic. "Shall we?" he asks simply. The group rises, gathering their belongings before walking together through the glass doors that lead to the wooden boardwalk stretching toward the beach. They move at different paces. Henry with his slight limp from an old carpentry accident, Irene carefully navigating the steps, Gloria striding confidently in her colorful outfit, Diane and Frank walking side by side, deep in conversation. Yet they move as a unit, adjusting naturally to accommodate each other without diminishing anyone's dignity. At the shoreline, they stand together watching the sun paint the waves with gold and crimson. Their silhouettes against the setting sun create a powerful image, 5 distinct figures standing tall, refusing to fade into the background of life despite society's expectations. "You know what strikes me about our discussion today?" Frank asks, his voice carrying over the rhythm of the waves. "Each essential we refuse to surrender requires the same fundamental ingredient: courage. Courage to stand firm when others, even those who love us, push us toward a diminished version of ourselves," Gloria agrees, her scarf dancing in the ocean breeze. "Courage to say, 'This matters to me,' even when others don't understand why," adds Henry. "And courage to keep growing, learning, and engaging fully with life when the world expects us to contract," Diane concludes. Irene, usually so quiet, turns to face the group, the sunset illuminating her gentle features. "What we're really protecting isn't just independence or self-expression or any single element," she observes. "We're protecting our right to remain fully ourselves, complex, evolving, and engaged, regardless of our age." The 5 friends stand in silence for a moment, watching as the sun meets the horizon. Then gradually, they turn and begin walking back toward the community center, leaving 5 sets of footprints in the sand, distinct and unapologetically individual, just like the lives they've chosen to lead. And what about you? As you navigate your own journey through the later seasons of life, which of these essentials resonates most deeply? Perhaps it's maintaining your decision-making authority when well-meaning family members try to help by taking over. Maybe it's preserving your personal style in a world that expects seniors to fade into beige backgrounds. Or possibly it's protecting your right to continue learning, growing, and engaging with new technologies and ideas. Whichever speaks to you, I encourage you to consider. What aspects of yourself will you refuse to surrender, no matter what pressures you face? What elements of your authentic self are non-negotiable as you age? The truth is, protecting these essentials isn't selfish, it's necessary. Research consistently shows that maintaining autonomy, social connections, intellectual engagement, and personal dignity correlates directly with better health outcomes and greater life satisfaction in our later years. More fundamentally, standing firm in your authentic self honors the wisdom you've accumulated through decades of living. You've earned the right to define what aging looks like for you, not according to someone else's limited expectations, but according to your own values, passions, and unique spirit. How will you begin protecting these essentials in your own life? Perhaps you'll start by having a thoughtful conversation with family members about your expectations for autonomy. Maybe you'll reclaim an aspect of self-expression you've gradually surrendered. Or perhaps you'll take that class, join that group, Or learn that technology you've been told is too complicated or unnecessary at your age. Whatever your starting point, remember the wisdom of the Stoics. Focus on what you can control. You may not control how others perceive aging, but you absolutely control how you respond to their perceptions. You control whether you accept their limitations or define your own possibilities. Like Frank, Gloria, Henry, Irene, and Diane, you have the power to remain fully, vibrantly yourself throughout every season of life. The key lies not in fighting against aging itself, a battle none of us can win, but in refusing to surrender the essentials that make your life meaningful, dignified, and authentically yours. So I ask you now, what will you refuse to surrender? And what first step will you take today to protect it? Like and subscribe if you're committed to becoming the best version of yourself. Thanks for watching.